the dance of reading. A person isn't a character isn't one thing or another. The act of reading each other is an ongoing interactive performance that is, in the end, social reality. Um, so, what I've been emphasizing, I want to sort of, in these local cases, I want to kind of branch back out now, zoom out, and uh, notice thematically the interplay of love and mortification, I think, is a key term in the novel. Um, Shame. If you just look through all the instances of that word of people being mortified, it's a key aspect of the experience of love and growth. Ironically, mortification, implies death, morbidity, uh, but it's in Austen. Uh, and this is part of Austen's modernism, is its necessary component of in the process, necessary part of the process of self-authorship, self-creation. You need to be uh, uh, challenged and disrupted, to going back now towards that Wordsworthian trope of being confused, having the tables turned. Mortification is a key experience of in so many of his poems that often, like the Lucy poems, involve actual death, but they teach us about the experience of love and empathy. Um, uh, So in Austen narratives, there's generally a formula distinguishing between first and second love. The first love being a naive infatuation, simple, seamless, with the falling in love with the surface, um, that is results in disappointment. It results in a recognition of a more complex reality than the first naive infatuation recognized. Mortification. Um, uh, that is then followed by the second experience of love, a more complex uh, uh, experience of love that has grown from the mortifying experience of lesson of disappointment. Um, and that I think is correlated with, that's what it means to be able to read, ironically. That's what it means to be able to write oneself, to exercise the kind of social authorship authority that Elizabeth's perspective ultimately exercises by the end of the novel. Her perspective is the defining perspective of the social world around her. Mortification is the key note of Darcy's love for Elizabeth. He finds it mortifying from the beginning. He's mortified to be attracted, to find her eyes so beautiful, um, and she's mortified by him. She's so humiliated by his what he she overhears him saying about her, and she's so mortified by the way her family, behaves, and how in his eyes Um, so the ironic experience of love, representation of love through what seems like the exact opposite. Um, and that's nowhere so um, clear as in the first marriage proposal of Darcy's, where that mortification is like turned outward, like he. Um, this scene is so a, fraught. I've talked about writing and reading and writing as a kind of dance, interplay of bodies, and the interplay of bodies that's dramatized here is so intense. His agitation, difficulty speaking, and then when he finally does speak, what he says here is so striking. You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you. Um, so, very strong words. So ardently I admire and love you. Um, and his so he steps on himself when he tries to explain his love. He the, it is flat-footed, and it ends up they're just at cross purposes. What he thinks is an explanation of his love, she finds insulting. He tells her that his self-degradation testifies to the truth of his love, which is not wrong, but which is the wrong thing to say, which is like the bad performance, inept performance. And uh, uh, so she in turn astonishes him, it insults him, and that this mutual they get in a kind of dance of a mutual injury. And I just want to point out how love here, passion here, is correlated with cruelty. Um, the I want you to notice how mean, just ruthlessly mean, Darcy is here. Um, this line. She saw with no slight indignation that he was listening with an air which proved him wholly unmoved by any feeling of remorse. He even looked at her with a smile of effective incredulity. So he's acting the part even more than he needs to in order to inflict as much pain as he can. Um, and that is a perverse, mortifying testimony to the actuality of his affection for her. The most intensely mortifying event in the novel actually doesn't quite happen. It's what is imagined to potentially happen to Lydia. Um, and what's interesting about this mortification is that it's highly correlated with modern life, the anonymity of London, um, and the mortification gets expressed through the impersonal, uh, you know, anonymous infrastructure of the modern metropolis, looking in these anonymous hotels and uh, uh, chasing these carriages. That's There's something particularly horrifying about losing Lydia in this anonymous urban infrastructure. Um, Horrifying, because of the, loss of the family, the security of the family structure in the country, and horrifying also because of the kind of anonymous, innumerable other similar fates that the London may contain. That they're looking um, for to follow these coaches. Um, uh, Mr. Gardner meant to go to Epsom, the place where they last changed horses, to see the postilions and try if anything he could make it out from them. His object was to discover the number of the hackney coach. It had come from a fare from London. He thought the circumstance of a gentleman and a lady's moving from one carriage to another may be remarked, and meant to make inquiries. So it's like that vestige, the circumstance of a gentleman and a lady removing from one carriage to another. That it's like that's a vestige of the individuality of the identity of Lydia may yet save her if somebody noticed it, but it's on the cusp of disappearing, of dissolving into the anonymous uh, uh, mediation of urban life, of a mass urban metropolis. Um, so that's different than the mortification of saying something embarrassing or being associated with somebody saying something embarrassing at a private, at a ball. This is a whole other level of mortification that has to do with the systemic structure of the urban metropolis, and all these new forms of speed and a transmission of identity and meaning in the urban context, that's being at stake here, and that Austen is marking in a particularly pointed, powerful way, I think. So, going back to how social authority, social experience is communicated and registered, by shame, by mortification, this recognition of the threat to not just romance, but to identity that the new modern urban world represents, is crucial. The mortification of the danger that Lydia is exposed to, the mortifying danger that Lydia is exposed to, that's also a function of reading. Crucially, it doesn't happen. She's saved from that fate. It's an imagined prospect. So it's something that characters are reading in. It's an experience of reading that it's mortifying, of reading the coaches, of reading the situation that Lydia's fallen into. The characters, the Bennet family, are all reading this scenario just as we are as readers of the text. It's the mortification, that they fear that Lydia, that might happen. The consequences for Lydia, are severe. The total loss of reputation, which is to say loss of identity, which is to say subjection to absolute peril, physical peril, and it doesn't happen, but that's like fiction. We're reading a fiction. This, Pride and Prejudice also didn't happen. The story in Pride and Prejudice also didn't happen. But this hypothetical, imagined mortification is a crucial part of the story, crucial part of learning, and growth that the characters go through. So that's telling us also something about what the novel, the hypothetical experience of the novel stands to teach us, readers. So I want to show you a little video by one of the best climbers in the world, talking about the most scared he's ever been. So he's proficient at this scary sport of climbing, and the way he talks about fear is interesting and illuminating about this. Its correlation with reading.
Most scared you've ever been, and why? Well, it took me to become a father to discover that climbing, fear for yourself in climbing is not actually all that scary. Being scared for someone else that you care about is far, far more scary. So the most scared I've ever been by an order of magnitude was when my daughter fell out of her pram and fell down a set of stairs when she was 1 or 2. But the next morning, she was absolutely fine and, no lasting damage. Actually, if I think about it directly, I still get quite upset. So that's such as the lasting scar that it leaves on my mind, despite the fact that there was actually no long-term consequences. But since this vlog is about climbing, I'll tell you about the most scared I've ever been in climbing. And that moment was right here where I'm stood just now. As I say, we're on Binny and Shoes. 2 years ago, I had a project up in the fortress here, which was going.
So what's interesting is he emphasizes it's much scarier to be scared for someone else than it is to be scared for yourself. The same point that Austin makes about sort of the web, the social, that we exist in our relationships, that we experience maybe vicariously empathy more than just self-interested personal emotions that are limited to our personal individual concerns. But even hypothetically, imaginary fears may be more powerful than real ones. He says that it didn't happen, but I still, when I think about my daughter's fall, I'm still disturbed by it, even though nothing happened. It turned out to be okay. It was all hypothetical. So he's saying, this guy's, does all this scary stuff. He says the most scared was something that happened to somebody else that actually didn't even happen. So that's really telling about what novels tend to teach us, that they're imaginary scenarios of empathizing with imaginary people. But they give us real experiences of real, the patterning of social life and emotions. So, and that brings us back to Wordsworth, because that's, I think a big key way of looking at Wordsworth is the patterning of emotion and social life. One of the most famous books ever written about Wordsworth is called The Halted Traveler. or I mean, it's a chapter, but one of the most famous characterizations of Wordsworth from Jeffrey Hartman, the halted traveler, and we've seen plenty of examples of that trope of the the poet. I wandered lonely as a cloud, old man wandering. Um, Simon Lee, wandering and then halted and surprised by a stranger. Um, and again, and having this experience of the just this disruptive experience, reorienting poet's perspective in a crucial way. Um, and that's we see that happen to that's a scenario that's a good way of characterizing key moments of learning and growth for Elizabeth, who gains new insight into Darcy through these surrogate representations of his character. So it kind of, by reading the land, by reading his estate, by the way in which he reads the way in which he's represented in his portrait, she learns about him through these representations, fictional, quasi-fictional, surrogate representations of Darcy's actual character. She reads and gains new insight into the actuality of his person, and thereby demonstrates to us, what reading's about, what reality is about. The reality is about this experience of reading. Like I wandered lonely as a cloud. Wordsworth is known as the founder of the school of lake poetry, and Elizabeth pointedly plans a trip with the gardeners. This organic metaphor is, as often is the case with Austen's names, registered very pointedly in the name of the gardeners. The gardeners plan a trip with her, cultivate plans to travel to the lakes. But instead, as a surrogate replacement for the lakes, they traveled to Pemberley, where their travel is halted, or Elizabeth is arrested by the prospect of the beautiful land, the beautiful estate, having just the kind of appreciation for the land that Edmund Burke just espouses, but in this much more refined, sophisticated manner of reading, with attention to the intelligence and formal complexity of being able to read the complexities of social life and social character. But it's important to notice how clearly Austen is staging a scene of aesthetic appreciation, of a sense for the arrangement of the moment, the accidental beauty in the arrangement of nature and the land. They gradually ascended for half a mile and then found themselves at the top of a considerable eminence where the wood ceased, and the eye was instantly caught by Pemberley House. The eye was not her eye, but the eye. What difference does that make? It anonymizes. It's not just about her private experience. The way in which she is arrested personally is not just about her. It's about a value that would arrest the I per se, any I. She's appreciating a value that isn't just about her personal taste. So that's mentioned before, distinguishing feature of aesthetic value, unlike our taste for certain kinds of foods. It's not idiosyncratically mine. It's appreciating a experience of the moment, being in the moment, but it's not just about me. Remember that Wordsworth's dissolving into the crowd in the moment of his experience of the daffodils. Losing myself. I'm finding myself in the moment. I'm appreciating something special about this moment. I'm caught in the moment. But it's not just about me. I'm also kind of transcending myself and having appreciating something impersonal and beyond myself at the same time. Rising back, the stream of some natural importance is the interplay, the same kind of paradox. I'm finding myself and losing myself at the same time. I'm in the moment, but also transcending at the same time. It's natural and designed. It seems there's something accidental, but purposeful. Similar kinds of paradox or resolved, synthesized, dancing oppositions of some natural importance was swelled into greater, but without any artificial appearance. Its banks were neither formal nor falsely adorned. Elizabeth was delighted. She'd never seen a place for which nature had done more, or where natural beauty had been more so little counteracted by awkward taste. They were all of them warm in their admiration, and at that moment she felt that to be mistress of Pemberley might be something. She sees a reflection of herself, or an imagined self. She finds herself in the way she imagines herself. And later when she explores Pemberley, she finds Darcy in how he's imagined, how he's represented in his portrait. And this is a very, maybe the most powerful and precise description of reading in the novel. The way in which Elizabeth reads the portrait, she reads him, but she reads herself. Even more importantly, she reads herself in how she reads him. That's essential, romantic irony, essential romantic conception of the purpose of art is to provide a kind of mechanism for the reader, for the reader's own self creation, or going back to the painting of the wanderer over the sea of fog. The painting is a machine for the viewer's own self creation. So how does this happen? How does Austen describe that? Um, uh, so Elizabeth standing before the portrait of Darcy. At this moment, in Elizabeth's mind, a more gentle sensation towards the original than she had ever felt at the height of their acquaintance. So isn't that amazing? And isn't it, novel-like? She's saying how we can have more powerful feelings towards through fiction than through reality. The commendation bestowed on him by Miss Reynolds was of no trifling nature. What praise is more valuable than the praise of an intelligent servant? That's a very key point and question. What can a servant testify to uniquely? As a brother, a landlord, a master, she considered how many people's happiness were in his guardianship. Again, how who he is testified, represented by all these surrogates, the way in which he is reflected in this network of relationships that surround him. Most importantly, maybe, by the most lowly, the most humble, maybe testifies the most. Every idea was favorable to his character, and as she stood before the canvas on which he was represented and fixed his eyes upon herself, she fixed his eyes on her. She sees him seeing her. She thought of his regard with a deeper sentiment of gratitude than it had ever raised before. She is more grateful for his regard. She's seeing him in a way she's can be grateful for than she ever had before. Such a complex, imaginative interplay of self and other that's getting enacted here, that's getting described here. And again, this complexity is what novels give us practice in, and I think what Austen's suggesting is that's how reality is fixed, is through this awareness of the complexity of social interactions and kind of authoring of the dance of their interplay. That's what writing does, that's what reading. If you keep a journal, or that's why I'm encouraging you to write in this class, as much as you can. The writing power of writing is to reflect, to find and represent a kind of complexity that you otherwise wouldn't in your experience, and the act of writing fixes it the way she here fixes his eyes on her. She's defining how she sees her. She's authoring his view of her. I think Austen is suggesting that's the power of writing and reading. Writing through reading, the way in which she reads the painting is a way of writing what's in the painting, and what's the reality that's represented. The crucial power of writing and reading is further underscored by the pivotal role played by Darcy's letter. The most important interaction between the two again takes place through these surrogates. She interacts with his painting, he writes her a letter. Their interaction is, their most intimate interaction is virtual and indirect, mediated. by these kinds of artwork, writing and painting. Um, and Austen really goes into the detail and process of Elizabeth's reading of this letter, and underscores how it's not just reading but rereading. Again, that experience of like first and second love, of reprocessing um, experience is very reminiscent of Wordsworth. Wordsworthian recollection, that we sort of find ourselves through reprocessing a rhythm, a kind of, again, musical rhythm of reflecting on experience. Um, and it's lovely and remarkable how this reading, is initiated in the word, like in a Wordsworth poem, in nature, rambling through the grove of the countryside. It's her ramble is interrupted by this, stranger she sees first at a distance. Turns out to be Darcy. It delivers this letter. That so, as in a Wordsworth poem, this nature is experience, a rhythm of mind, a rhythm of walking, interacting with the environment, are encoded in writing. And emotion is the process of rereading this letter cultivates, gardens the new emotions, are processed through the exercise of reading. So I want to just draw your attention to one final example of free and direct discourse that of if it's sort of the climactic moment of the narrative, the second proposal. And here, how would you compare it to the first one? There are such strong words, strong bottled up emotion and drama in that first scene. And here everything's it's kind of dissolved in his omniscient narration and summary. That is to say that we're left to imagine what Elizabeth says. How it's all become vague and impersonal. She doesn't see his eye. We don't hear her assent to his proposal. We're left to imagine it, and that puts us in the position of Lizzie herself as a reader of the scene, and that's the point. Is that the most vivid experience of reality is the capacity that Lizzie ultimately exercises to author it, to imagine it on her own terms. So we're not told. What Austen gives us is the implicit experience. We're no longer told how the eye looks. We're left now to imagine it for ourselves. And again, that's the most real experience, is the one that's left implicit. Had Elizabeth been able to encounter his eye, She might have seen how well the expression of heartfelt delight diffused over his face became him. It's an aesthetic judgment that we're told happens, but we're left to imagine the details, the content of how it happens for ourselves. Though she could not look, she could listen, and he told her of feelings which improving of what importance she was to him, made his affection every moment more valuable. So she's delineating the form of an experience of love, and letting the reader fill in the emotional content. And it's an experience of mutual dancing, mutual appreciation, importance. He's proving her importance to him, which makes him ever more valuable to her. It's back and forth.